How will the second Trump presidential term transform America? Just asking questions. I'm Zach Weissmueller, senior producer for Reason, joined by my co host, Reason associate editor Liz Wolfe. Hi, Liz.
Hey, Zach.
We're officially in the Trump 2.0 era. The New York Times editorial page calls it American Carnage 2, while Trump promised a new American golden age in his inaugural address, which was decidedly less dark than his 2017 American Carnage speech.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world.
So, how excited, hopeful, or anxious should we be as we enter these next 4 years? To help us sift through Trump's speech and slate of day one executive orders, which he signed in front of a crowd as he tossed out presidential signing pens like t-shirts at a football game, is journalist Mike Pesca, host of the popular daily news podcast, The Gist. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Slight regrets that you used the word slate in my introduction, but that's okay. It was in a different context. And what did you say? How hopeful, anxious, or suspicious
Excited.
should we be?
Yeah.
7,
Choose your
9, and 8.
Okay.
Can I go now?
Bye. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Yeah.
By the end of the interview, I'll tell you on a scale of what to what. Yeah.
I wanted to just get a sense right off the bat, like, Mike, what do you think the vibe of the inauguration was?
Yeah, you're right. A few people were saying Carnage 2. I guess it's stuck in their mind, and that just shows you something about Trump branding. The New Yorker referred to it as Carnage. Politico PM Playbook said American Carnage Part 2. Vanity Fair, Trump claims he was saved by God in thundering dark inaugural address. I don't think it was Carnage. And it might have been hopeful, words-wise. Trump himself said, oh, that was the hopeful part. And then he then went to another speech where he talked to just acolytes and fans and says, this is what I wanted to say. The paralipsis, I think, is the linguistic version of the stuff he wanted to say. And as a last point, just because I'm an unbelievably hopeful person, he is right in a way that we're in a golden age. There has never been a better time to be alive. I don't think that has much of anything to do with Trump. Maybe he's more headwinds than tailwinds, but progress is always being made. And it's probably true that our lifespans are going to go up and set records during his second term. Probably the economy will expand. So that part's true. And he's going to do a lot of horrible things that maybe we'll talk about today.
Well, he's supposed to be. I know that Brian Johnson has met with RFK, so the longevity don't die agenda is slowly getting folded into Trump 2.0. So lifespans will definitely be heading towards infinite soon.
Right.
I mean,
well, it depends if you take
agree.
the average or the median, right? Johnson could throw the whole damn thing off.
That's true. I mean, I agree with you. I thought it was. I cringed at American Carnage the first time around. This time around, I thought it was a much more hopeful message, and one that I think is more appropriate to where we actually are as a country at the moment. There wasn't so much of the raging against enemies, real and imagined. He was more sedate and controlled, at least in this setting. The Elon Musk speech, which we'll talk. Yeah.
Haven't we just been anchored though, right? Like we've been anchored, but in a sense, like Trump has quite a few enemies he pointed to, some of whom were like in the room with him, right? The entire political establishment and sort of apparatus that prosecuted him and that's been persecuting him and, all his allies, basically. He always loves to do a shout out there. And then basically literally everyone south of the border is also, I think, a perceived Trump enemy. So I wonder whether to some degree we've just gotten kind of desensitized to it all. What say you, Zach?
Oh yeah, I mean I think that's part of what's going on here is the normalization of Trump, the normalization of MAGA. Like that's also I think partly why it just felt more sedate because the counter reaction to Trump has not been as over the top this time because we're all kind of know to some degree what to expect, and I think just both sides have sort of stepped back just a little bit rhetorically,
One
but not
really
completely.
weird top level theme that I was noticing is like for a guy who I think tends to lie or obfuscate a fair amount, and I say that as somebody who voted for him, right? So I'm not like a total Trump derangement syndrome person. It is kind of funny how oriented Trump is toward keeping his campaign promises. That was sort of a theme that really stuck out to me as I listened to the inauguration speech. Like nothing about it was new or especially surprising. He was basically echoing things that we had heard before on the campaign trail. But then, especially the whole flurry of executive orders that he rained down from on high yesterday. It really seems like he's either trying to legitimately make good on these promises or to construct this very powerful image of somebody who like said he was going to do X, Y, and Z, and then now is he doing it? And presidents, of course, always make a big deal out of, these things are day one priorities. But I have been somewhat struck by just the sheer amount of like action. Like Trump must be on so many amphetamines right now because he's getting so much stuff done, regardless of whether or not you believe those things to be good things or not. But he's been oddly fixated on this, like, I'm keeping my promises.
Well, Trump was very good at that in the first term. There are these organizations that track presidential promises, and he had a relatively good score compared to his predecessors. I mean, you could say, is if the Mexicans don't pay for the wall, does that count as a promise kept? All right,
Yeah.
let's say a promise mostly kept. So that wasn't the problem, though he lies tremendously on all sorts of anecdotes or matters of fact. If you list the things he said he was going to do, he at least tried to do them, right? The
Mhm.
Muslim ban, which he reformulated as the ban from majority Muslim countries, like that got done eventually. And he really did try to do it. And he's going to try to do it again. And you're right. We have been habituated to the words. And part of the reason why some of these words weren't so shocking was that he had previewed them before, right? If he said, I'm going to call it the Gulf of America instead of the Gulf of Mexico, I guess it was surprising enough to elicit a laugh from Hillary Clinton, but he said that before. So uh, it became, oh, that's just Trump being Trump, even though being Trump is crazy in terms of a lot of the words. And this is why
Yeah.
you asked me about the rhetoric. My strategy this term and hosting my show, The Gist, I'm going to be a lot less rhetoric oriented. I'll have fun with the rhetoric, but I know the rhetoric is it's not consistently going to mislead me. It's just not going to be the best way to orient me, to orient citizens about what's actually happening with the country. So I have to very much keep that in mind.
That
Yeah.
strikes me as, the type of self-reflection that should really get you banned from the media class, right? Like, surely you'll get kicked out even further because that's exactly what people should have been doing for these last few years, and exactly what I think many of our sort of broader industry colleagues have refused to do,
Right, right.
unfortunately.
And it's they're incentivized to make a huge deal out of every utterance, but it's hard. It's not exactly straightforward. And a thing that he says isn't a straight ahead negative indicator of a thing he's going to do. So sometimes the things that he says, he does follow through with and he does mean to follow through with. And sometimes I'll give you an example. The thing that's gotten me most upset is his mass pardoning of everybody. So he was asked about this beforehand, and he definitely said, I'm going to be giving out pardons. And when pressed, either in the form of, do you vow not to give out pardons to people who beat up police officers, or who are you going to give pardons to? He said, everything's on the table. So what do you do with that? You could report that he refused to rule it out, but there are so many times where he will say everything's on the table, like say with a war with Greenland, where it's not on the table. But there are other times, like with this, where he says everything's on the table because it is on the table. So you kind of have to report it. You shouldn't go nuts about it. You shouldn't totally ignore it. It's a little bit of a difficult thing, but the words and the actions have to take predominance over the word. The actions have to take predominance over the words.
Yeah, I think that's the prudent way to go about it. And it's difficult because, as you're suggesting here, there's an unpredictability to it. You don't know exactly when the rhetoric is going to match the action. And like one of the things that I'm disturbed that I've become habituated to or has become normalized is this, that we're just going to enter into state of emergency after state of emergency. That was one of the things
Mhm.
he did in his speech, was declared we've got an emergency at the southern border. We're also going to be, doing some sort of possibly military action in the cities. And this didn't start with Trump, to be clear. I mean, this is all post 9/11, kind of lurching from emergency to emergency. And I'm bothered by the fact that I'm not more bothered by it, I guess, in a way,
Yeah.
because this is not a good way to govern, where we've got one president coming with his emergency, and the next president clearing out all their executive orders and coming in with their set of orders to perpetuate their version of an emergency.
Okay, but
That's
Zach,
a
to
problem.
push back on that, is this a
Yeah.
form of limited government, right? This idea of like this administration will have all of these sweeping executive orders, but then essentially they'll be voided after 4 years. I'm not saying that this is ideal or especially functional, but like it's the same as the sort of libertarian cheering of gridlock in Congress, where it's like, well, this is one way to not get anything done. Do you
Yeah,
do you feel
except it
optimistic
does
on that front?
it does get things done, and these things
They don't
there
last.
tend
They don't
yeah,
endure.
well, there tend to be vestiges that do last,
Mm.
and there is continuity in certain aspects. I mean, we're going to talk about immigration policy in a little bit, but a lot of immigration policy is much more rhetoric. There's much more rhetoric. Distinction between in the rhetoric than in the policy. I mean, we talked with Tyler Cowen last week about how the deportations were higher under Obama than under Trump, and it's still unclear to me exactly how that's going to play out this
Right.
term.
But I think you have to look at the executive orders just based on the content of them. And then there's a little smidge that you say, well, what about the fact that these are done by fiat or executive
Mhm.
order?
Yeah.
So, an example for me where if it were done because Congress passed it, which in some ways correlates to the will of the people, would be canceling student debt. And I would have been convinced, all right, if you got the votes in Congress to do it, then that's what the people want, right? Or at least people will be held to account. But since they never did that, and they just tried to do it by executive action. I was more against it than if they had tried to do it via Congress. Also, a lot of times with these executive actions, especially student debt, they really don't go anywhere. They're really unconstitutional. I think with a lot of these immigration enforcement issues, they have to be done by executive order, and not just because Congress is sclerotic. It's these are powers invested in the executive. And Zach, I'm totally with you. I'm really worried about his designating, which is something the president does, with agencies, but designating drug lords as terrorist organizations. And what does that mean? And this also dovetails with what I was talking about. Like, is it just bullshitting? Is it just bluster when he talks about that? Oh, they're terrorists. They're the worst people. But you also have to take into account now that they do have the designation, it opens up certain military interventions. So it's something to pay attention to, but it's something to not over index for, I would guess.
I think with that specific point, I just want to linger there for a second before we move on. Now that they have that designation, what exactly is going to change in your eyes?
I don't know if it will change, but it could change that he could do the sort of interventions that the United States would do with a Hezbollah agent or
Mhm.
that United States allies would. I mean, there can be direct military interdiction with drug lords and drug cartels in Mexico. Now, if
I
you
mean, that's
do
what he
this,
said he's wanted to do, right? He
yeah,
said he wants to treat them like ISIS. He wants to go in and basically do drone strikes. I don't
if
know if
you
that's going to
do
happen,
this
but
above it doesn't change the fact that Mexico as a country is either going to like it or not like it. And just because the United States has a designation that allows themselves to do it, it is either wise or unwise without the assistance of Mexico. So I think that's the more
yeah.
important thing. Yeah.
This gets at a theme that I've been kind of curious about, especially with Mexico's new president talking about how basically if the United States under Trump shuts the border off, which it appears we appear to be in the early stages of such a thing, she will not be forcing the many, many people who've come from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Guatemala and Cuba to all leave, but they will, instead be able to stay in Mexico for a mighty long time. That coupled with Trump's sort of threatened or promised action against cartel leaders. And then that also coupled with the likely imposition of tariffs makes me wonder whether or not we're gearing up for some sort of very adversarial relationship between the United States and Mexico, which frankly, it's hard for me to see how that goes well. But I just think that like the relationship between, I believe Claudia Scheinbein, how do you pronounce her name?
Scheinbaum.
Scheinbein, um, and Trump, like this is something that I'm very intrigued by because it seems like she's tried to position herself oppositionally for the last few weeks, or if not months. And now Trump appears to actually be making good on all of the things that he was sort of threatening. And I'm wondering where exactly this relationship goes.
Well, the answer about how does that go well? It could go well for Trump in that if his immigration policies aren't yielding massive decreases, he'll now have a boogeyman. He'll now have
Mm. Yeah.
a punching bag. And she's just representing rationality or the interests of her country. She doesn't want all these Venezuelans in the country. So that could be useful to Trump. But
Mhm.
then again, I think he would actually want an actual, not just perception of a decrease, but an actual decrease. Because, half the things he says, he makes a big promise or a bold declaration about something that's not going badly or something that never was. So when he says, we're going to end the Green New Deal, that's meaningless. There wasn't the Green New Deal. There wasn't an EV mandate. So it's all rhetoric. But when he says we're going to decrease immigration, I think he really wants to decrease immigration. I know the people do. And I also think somewhat of a decrease in immigration is good national policy.
I mean, when I think about how this could go with Mexico, going to war with the cartels, this is not exactly a new idea. We have done it before, and what happened in the past when the U.S. government undertook something called the decapitation strategy, where it's like we're going to go and take out the heads of all the cartels. And what happened then was like the bloodiest period in modern American history, because all these wars to fill the power vacuum unfolded, and then we got El Chapo rise to power. They arrest him, his sons take over and basically pivot to fentanyl, and now we've got fentanyl going. So it's this continuous whack-a-mole strategy.
You think that was on the Excel spreadsheets, like the pivot to fentanyl? Do you think they have
It
presentations
probably
about
was.
it?
If you can go and read the DEA documents, and it pretty much says that was the business plan once his sons took over. And now if they're going to go full ISIS, I mean, then we have to start worrying about just conventional blowback type issues. Are we going to have like real terrorism coming out of our southern border and so forth? But while we're talking about the border, I know that was one of the clips that you had picked from Trump's speech to talk about, Liz.
Oh,
Should we
yes.
roll that clip? And I want to know what your thoughts were as to how he addressed that in his inaugural speech.
Yeah.
John, could you roll
Let's
that?
hit it.
I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
And inauguration.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release. And I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions, and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before.
So what struck you about that moment in his speech, Liz?
Well, I mean, on one hand, I think that he's totally correct that attempting to sort of attack the fentanyl supply chain is a good and reasonable thing to do. And I think that it makes a lot of sense for the executive to tackle that. I think he, sort of characteristically plays very fast and loose with the connection between. I mean, there's a lot of different groups of immigrants who have come to this country under a lot of different programs and with a lot of different statuses. And it is absolutely the case that some small percentage of those who have sought asylum at the southern border and or crossed illegally have, you know, engaged in the drug trade and brought more of that to the United States than there would otherwise be. That said, I don't think we know how large that percentage of the pool of asylum seekers actually is, and I fear that what he is doing is um, either unintentionally or intentionally punishing lots of people who I don't think are the sort of target demographic that he's really seeking to stamp out. And so that's the thing that really bothers me. There's a lot of people who are going to be caught in the crosshairs here. Of course, I mean, immigration has been a huge animating issue for this election. And I'm not one of those bleeding heart libertarians who is going to say that, well, actually, we just need to let, any, possibly good immigrant in, anybody with a credible case for why they ought to live here. We should just let, millions and millions and millions more people in. Like, frankly, that's not what the American people want. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to attempt to come to some sort of national consensus as best we can about what types of immigrants we want to let in, how many, where they ought to be resettled, whether or not they should have access to certain government programs, whether they ought to have access to certain forms of welfare, what our stipulations are in terms of them finding employment. Like, it's very reasonable for a country to attempt to figure out and to suss out what exactly do we want from these groups of people and how will we do that. And I think it's very fair to say under the Biden administration, that has not happened. However, the really awful thing that I'm seeing happening with Trump is that he is so interested in portraying immigrants as these horrible invaders, which is the rhetoric that he uses, invaders, that he, I think, will end up punishing lots of groups of people who really are not the ones who are threatening American safety or the ones contributing to the fentanyl crisis. For example, the refugee resettlement program he has decided to end via executive fiat. This is something that since like 1980 has resettled 3 million people. There's not a real reason to totally eradicate it, to totally scrap it. It has been, I think, highly successful at what it was intended to do. It's not clear to me that those people are the actual ones he wants to target. The other thing that he's been really focused on, and which he, made good on via executive order yesterday, was attempting to basically on the campaign trail, JD Vance kept saying over and over again, hey, Trump's not going to be trying to deport everyone. He will be going in a reasonable, sort of dignified order. It will be sensible, and it will be targeting those with criminal convictions, those who are currently sitting in jails for crimes they committed other than the crime of entering illegally. We will deport those people first. We'll engage in deportation proceedings with those people first, and then we'll work our way. But the people, the mother with her child who's living peacefully here, albeit illegally, we're not going to go after them first. Okay, well, color me awfully surprised because Trump's executive order issued yesterday, which David Beer from Cato has been tweeting about, actually makes it so that that list that Vance had claimed would exist does not exist. And the order that they go after these illegal immigrants is not what Vance was sort of claiming it was going to be. And I have a real problem with that. I think that's a pretty substantial bait and switch. And then the last thing, which I think is honestly, like to Pesca's point, not even worth paying too much attention to, is the birthright citizenship thing. Trump is attempting to scrap birthright citizenship. I think he's attempting to really, really, really make major headlines and looking like he's cracking down on immigration. He's also being like extremely sweeping with this because it's even children born on American soil to parents with currently legal status, which is just kind of an odd thing for him to go after. It's not clear to me that this is a group that is in any way threatening us here or a safety concern. But I think that part of it although awful if that actually happened, is very, very likely to be slapped down in the courts. This is like pretty blatantly unconstitutional. We already have, I think, 19 different attorneys general who are suing it, as well as a bunch who are suing Trump, as well as a bunch of civil rights groups. Like, this is not something that I think will pass legal muster. But all of this comes together to paint a picture of a president who I think has taken a mandate from the people to crack down on immigration, but in a way that's sort of characteristically stupid. And I don't think we'll actually get to the kind of reasonable heart of what he had initially said, which is it is bad to have a crazy fentanyl crisis in this country, and attacking the supply chain and the ways it's getting smuggled into our country is a means of affecting change there. Like, that's a reasonable starting proposition. And he is correct that cartels massively contribute to that. But it's not clear to me how going after birthright citizenship or refugees who've been successfully resettled will in any way help that. That's my
Mike,
rant.
what do you think, Mike? Because you mentioned earlier that you think there might be a reasonable national policy that in some way involves reducing the number of immigrants that are coming to the United States. Is this that policy, or do you agree with Liz that there's some overstep here?
Well, clearly not. I mean, my statement was based on the fact that we set all sorts of records during the Biden administration. Until the last year of the Biden administration, the only thing that he or the people who were running the administration cared about was the humanity towards the people that did experience an interdiction. So to take a couple points, J.D. Vance as the reasonableness splainer, not working with this, not working with I only think he's going to pardon the rioters who didn't beat up police officers. I think we have to start, if we haven't already, discounting everything that J.D. Vance said to try to lessen the extremeness, the characteristic extremeness of Trump himself. Also, the Alien Enemies Act. Why do you guys think, I have a very strong suspicion about this, but why do you think Trump is attracted to the Alien Enemies Act, if you had to say?
I mean, the like slight libtard answer would be because it's maximally dehumanizing, right?
Well,
Is that
okay, but what about it is the substance of it? I
the
think it's the
naming of
name. I think it's the
it?
words.
Alien?
It's the branding. He
Yeah.
loves the fact that he could say aliens next to enemies and then go back to 1798, the founding fathers. But we don't
Mhm.
even need that act to do anything that he's asking. It was arguably effective in 1812. Then in the 1930s, they rounded up a lot of Italians, such as myself. Not such as myself. I've always been in the Italian part of my family, always loyal to the United States. But it's a totally pointless act. It has no application currently. Anything you want to do now you can. You don't need the act to do it. It's just he likes the words, and so he likes being provocative. But it's not just the words. It's also going way too far in ways that, sadly enough, we do have to worry about because you can't fall back on, well, J.D. Vance said it's reasonable. Last question. Are there bleeding heart liberals? I didn't even know that that was a category. Sorry, libertarians. You said I'm not one of
Oh,
those
there's
bleeding
an
heart
entire
libertarians.
blog called Bleeding Heart Libertarians.
Oh my
Yeah, which
God.
I like. I mean, it's nice. No, but
I
I'm
was
more
always
being
attracted to the intellectual forcefulness of the movement, not the bleeding heartedness.
well, I do think that there is a specific strain of people. I don't know. I think I struggle with this tension a little bit. Um, it is important to me to look, I don't want to claim that every single person who crosses our southern border, who enters our country is, a net good necessarily. That every single family is just this wonderful, bootstraps pulling up or, super high achievement. Like, that's just literally not true. But by the same token, not everybody who enters into this country is sort of a criminal low life, right? And the more, it's the same as sort of the folly of like the Me Too movement acting like women are angels and men are demons, and women can never lie and they have no capacity for
Oh,
evil.
you
It's
mean
like, I believe,
hashtag believe immigrants?
yeah,
You don't
it's
buy
just,
that one?
yeah, right. But like all of that was bullshit, right? Because migrants have capacity for
Yeah.
extreme entrepreneurship and ingenuity, and they also have capacity for evil, right? Because they're people just like you and me. And I think that this is an area where progressive rhetoric and sometimes, frankly, libertarian rhetoric kind of gets it wrong. I just don't think it's very persuasive to people to act like, oh, well, it's always and everywhere a great thing to have pretty much all migrants are like by nature of their, undertaking of this intrepid journey here, like they must want it so very bad. And so it's, they will absolutely be, huge contributors to society. It's like, well, Mike, you're a New Yorker just like I am. I don't know. We've let an awful lot of people in, and because of, some faults of their own and some issues with actually getting work authorization, and because the state and city have decided to give them a whole bunch of welfare, we have a situation where there are a lot of migrants who are just being sheltered on our dime and who aren't actually seeking gainful employment. And there's a bunch of different factors that are at play, but like,
And countries get to define
let's
their
be real
borders,
about it.
and
Yeah.
countries get to define their immigration system, and this country has said we haven't been doing it right, and we need a correction, and that's all
Yeah.
democratic. Yeah.
Well,
Like,
I
I'm just
will
trying to be
go.
pragmatic here. I want to be realistic about
Yeah,
what people are reacting to and what's pissing them off.
I will go ahead and speak up for the bleeding heart libertarian perspective and say that I still believe that as long as somebody is, nonviolent and productive, and they are not
Oh,
going
so
to
now you
be
want
a
me out of
drawn
this
to something
country because I have lots of lots of
that I,
feelings and
you know,
sometimes I'm a little
I,
lazy?
I think they should be. I think those people should be allowed to at least come, live, work here. Citizenship is maybe a different question, but we've seen backlash to even the most productive people in terms of this whole H-1B discourse. So that this is much deeper than oh, we don't want people coming here and going on welfare, committing crimes. This is really about just we don't want any more people coming from foreign countries here and kind of changing the demographics of this country. That is what's driving a large portion of, I think, Trump's agenda right now. And this executive order that you referenced, Liz, is just very strong evidence of that to me.
Well, Zach, I
It
wanna I
Yeah,
wanna fight you really fast on that though. Like, I
sure.
agree with you that there's a strain of like straight up xenophobia that's driving Trump and Trump supporters animus. But I also think that the conditions that you just described, which is like you want peaceful, sort of law-abiding people with good work ethics to come and enter into this country if they seek to do so. When you have such wild and uncontrolled chaos at the southern border, we aren't actually necessarily selecting for that, right?
I
That
agree.
like, and I think it's fair for people to have this reaction of like, well, the way things have gone under the Biden years, like that doesn't satisfy the criteria that you just laid out. The criteria you just laid out is eminently reasonable. But I think many people are kind of like, well, but that's not what's happening. And if we got to a
No.
place where that was happening, maybe it would be more tolerable as a status
I,
quo.
I I agree with you. I think that when Trump first came in, he was trying to sell something that was not exactly there. So the reason he couldn't match Obama's deportation numbers is because Obama basically went through the prisons and deported a bunch of criminals. That the kind of the low hanging fruit there had been picked. Trump came in and he had to go searching for people to post numbers on the board. I did a story where he deported a guy who'd been living here for like 20 years, working like these were the type of people that they needed to track down in order to kind of juice their stats a little bit. And I think we're going to see more of that this time around, although it is a different situation
But
because
now he's right. Now
The
he's in
Biden
the
administration definitely
post-record-setting era of Biden. So
correct.
Biden did him a
Yes,
favor by not doing anything
yes,
about immigration for three
yes.
quarters of his
And
years.
where
And
I agree with Liz is that the chaos is bad for all of us. Those of us who want more immigration, it's a bad thing because Americans are very uneasy about what sort of problems can be coming over the border when there's a feeling of it not being controlled. We saw this in Brexit. This was a big motivator for Brexit, just wanting some sovereignty. Once that once Brexit won, the kind of opposition to immigration went down, even though the immigration levels didn't actually go down, just because people had a feeling of sovereignty. So, if Trump can give people that feeling while at the same time, not redefining what birthright citizenship means, I'll consider that a win. But I'm very concerned about where it's headed from here.
Yeah.
I do want to
And it's
keep
also,
moving
you
us.
also have
Yeah.
to take into account competing virtues. There's this other virtue of when it is the overwhelming will of the people, you could say the people are wrong, or one could say, you're not saying this, but the people are racist, or the people don't understand the situation. But of all his agenda items, Gallup polled all of them. And the number one thing that people want, 68%, want him to control illegal immigration. And if nothing else, it's a lesson to future Democrats to remember what Fromm says, right? If you don't take it seriously, fascists will.
Yeah. Well, Mike, let me bring you. You had identified a clip that you wanted to talk about. It was not from the actual inauguration address. It was from the post-inauguration address where Trump kind
Right.
of,
Inauguration After Dark.
Yeah.
yeah,
That one.
inauguration
I
after
like that
hours.
one.
Uh, uh, Before we roll it, tell our audience why you wanted to discuss this one in particular, because I think it'll help
Because
them
it
to
shows
have that
that
in mind.
even if you had a scintilla of thinking, oh, Trump controlled himself a bit in the official inauguration, and obviously those in the media who called it Carnage Part 2 didn't, of course he's going to go to a Jason Hall and say, here's what I really wanted to say. So of course it's Trump being Trump in a after dark,
Okay,
less
so here,
inhibited way. And then the specifics of his complaints are just, the classic hit list that he's been campaigning on so far. I used the phrase once before. It's what the rhetoric professors call paralipsis, which is
mm,
I'm not saying, I'm just saying, well, I really shouldn't say this thing. And
ah.
so he talks about this thing they didn't want him to say. And of course, he says it.
All right, so here's some Trump after hours paralipsis. Let's look at this.
Put on your robes.
They said, please don't bring that up right now. You can bring it up tomorrow. I said, how about now in front of the I'll bring it up right now. But we're giving you a little more information than we gave upstairs. But no, they pardoned a lot of people. They pardoned, before we even get to today, they pardoned, 33 murderers, absolute murderers, the worst murderers. When you get the death sentence in the United States, you have to be bad, because they don't give it much. And he pardoned almost everybody having a death sentence. And if you went through the crimes that were committed, you wouldn't even believe them. The level of violence, the people that were killed, the innocence of people that were killed, and children killed by these people. And he pardoned them for whatever reason.
Okay, we could, I think, leave it there. That's the more unfiltered Trump, the backstage unfiltered Trump. By the way, I'll just mention what he was sort of rambling about at the end there about Biden pardoning people on death row. He did not. This seems like a technical distinction, but it's important. He did not pardon people on death row. He commuted their sentences, so they're not, murderers just running free now. Basically, instead of getting executed, they're going to serve life in prison without parole. But what else did you want to say about that, Mike?
That was done in Emancipation Hall, and he was clearly emancipated from the confines of the normally staid Donald Trump type official address. He also talked a lot about Liz Cheney, still upset about Liz Cheney, still upset about Adam Kinzinger. Adam Kinzinger cries too much for Donald Trump's points. So these are his obsessions. These are what drives him. He's talking to a crowd that's going to eat it up, but he could say anything at any point, and he just needs to hit these points. So it is not going to be in any way a more restrained or a more constructive Donald Trump. It's going to be
I
a
like
lot of grievance.
I liked Usha Vance's sort of studied neutrality, where she just knows if you simply keep your mouth neutral and your eyes big and sort of just stay
Mhm.
in as neutral a position as possible, the surprise or the shock or the annoyance sort of won't register to people. It's a very, I don't know, the Vances strike me as a very sort of politically adept couple, despite how relatively young they are for the world of
Yeah.
politics.
Do you think Usha leaned into the dog cone esque radius of Melania's hat and said, "Who's your haberdasher?" Because I think that who among the Trump wives wouldn't want one of those?
Very
You
true.
know, him going on this rant about Milley and Cheney and all these targets after hours, does that give you any? I mean, do you think that is just where that energy is going to be channeled? Because that was a big anxiety during the campaign. Like, is Trump just going to be going on a vengeance tour this time and prosecuting his political enemies? Like, do you think he's like that's the energy is just going to get channeled into those kind of speeches instead of any actual policy action, or do you
Well,
expect we are going to see the vengeance tour?
Well, I think it's a shame that Joe Biden had to pardon Liz Cheney and even members of his family. Maybe that second part is more than a shame, but or a shame, not a shame that accrues to him. But I think he did, right? I think he did have to pardon Liz Cheney. I think that Trump has his instincts. And if Kash Patel is in charge of the FBI, what are his qualifications other than he's the id of Trump's vengeance, you know?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't want to worry about it. He does a lot of bluster and threatening. And, he never went against Hillary Clinton, right? After talking about it. But someone who is way down the list, I don't think Peter Strzok, for instance, has the wherewithal or the base or any of the ability to fight back of a Hillary Clinton. I think he does want to go against some of these people who he sees as making his life miserable.
I, I mean, while we're on the topic of pardons, also, of course, he pardoned Fauci, which I think was outrageous personally. And I think that
He just did that to make you mad, Zach.
I think
He was trying to get a rise out of you.
I hope that Senator Rand Paul continues his fact finding mission, regardless of whether Fauci is criminally liable or not. I think that there's a lot of evidence that he misled the public.
Do you think the main charge is perjury in that back and forth with gain of function research? Is that the one you think about
That
most?
that seems to be the most obvious one. I think that there's still perhaps more to be uncovered, but we'll see what happens now that there's a new sheriff in town.
Mike,
But
you have to understand this is very personally upsetting to Zach because he's a Biden voter. So the fact that Biden would then turn around and pardon Fauci like that is, highly upsetting to him.
yeah, there's a couple betrayals that make me fill me with regret. But
Directly at Zach. Directly aimed at Zach.
yes,
He
but
really did vote for Biden. Isn't that so hilarious? It's
I
so
voted
funny.
for Biden, and I do it again, just not Joe. Hunter 2028.
Hunter.
But you're very upset about the January 6th pardons as well. You've
Oh,
mentioned it a
yeah.
couple times. I saw your Twitter feed is full of highlighting different cases of of rioters who were pardoned. Why is that upsetting to you?
A guy took an American flag and started beating a police officer with it. And he was sentenced to 4 years in jail and is now out after a few months.
Hmm.
How is that not upsetting to anyone? That doesn't fit in with any theory of justice. It only fits in with Donald Trump saying, "You're my sword and I will now pay you back."
Yeah.
And he didn't have to. I'm not even going to get into Enrique Tarrio and Joe Biggs and the Oath Keepers. Not even going to get into those guys. Some of them weren't
And
there. I think that I followed the trials pretty closely. It does seem that the charge of seditious conspiracy does apply. But if you
and
just
those
take the
just a second though, those higher profile ones were commuted, right? Not
yes,
actually pardoned. Okay.
yes,
So
but
and I
they're
mean
free. Enrique
they're free.
Tarrio got in a town car and left jail.
Yeah.
Um,
But would
we're
that make a
talking.
difference to you if it was more targeted, like some of the people who've been serving years and years already? Trump's just like your sentence is commuted, but you're not pardoned, so you still you committed the crime. Obviously, it's on your record.
I'm against all of it. I think everyone who went into the Capitol should, if they were adjudicated to have committed a crime, should, in fact, most of the time it was suspended sentences. That's fine. I don't think there was an excess of justice. It was a horrible thing to allow. But specifically, the people who beat policemen who didn't die on that day, but Brian Sicknick died of a stroke that not just I, but the medical examiner is very much convinced was brought on by the extreme stress of being exposed to pepper spray. And the guy who pepper sprayed him is now off. So how do you say you are at all not a law and order person or just a person with the slightest scintilla of a sense of justice who takes that guy who beats a police officer who might have been a Trump voter, beats him with an American flag and lets him out of jail? I think it's a horror And on this one, just like with the immigration, the American people do agree with me. I just don't know if they'll be able to pay attention given the threat matrix that's going on right now with everything Trump has done.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on pardons, and I want to play one more clip, is just that, between these sorts of pardons, the pardon of Hunter Biden, these very self-serving political pardons, I think this only increases the rationale and the urgency of pardoning or commuting the sentence of Ross Ulbricht, who the founder of the Silk Road, who Trump had promised the Libertarian Party that he was going to set free day one. That deadline has passed, but we'll give him a couple extra days, and we're watching. We want to see Ross walk free. He's done over a decade. It's time to let this guy out for starting a dark web website. Yeah,
A real
Liz?
question. Would Trump have any real incentive to follow through on this promise?
I guess just the incentive would be kind of like what we talked about at the beginning, where Trump he does seem to get some sort of satisfaction in delivering what he says. Coming through on a deal, being perceived as a credible deal maker. That would be that. If you're asking if the Libertarian Party has any leverage over him whatsoever now, the answer would, from my point of view, be absolutely not. But it's the right thing to
Your
do.
words, not mine, Zach.
Yeah. I want to play
You'd
one
agree
more
with
clip.
And a good point is that
Yeah.
Ross has served a decade, right?
Yeah.
Yes, 11
Yeah.
years.
And so this to me is like, Biden pardoned Leonard Peltier and the FBI didn't want that. He is in jail for killing 2 FBI agents, but the man is 80 and he served decades and decades. And I don't know if he did it or not, but that is a consideration as opposed to a guy
Yeah.
who served a couple of months so
Yeah,
far.
Yeah.
Ross is 40. He's been in since age 29.
Yeah.
I
It's a
want to
long
turn to
time.
a clip on that dark subject. I want to turn to a clip that makes me happy, which is of Elon Musk prancing around the stage and delivering his remarks at the inaugural address. This was one of my selections. John, could you roll that?
Yes! This is what victory feels like. Yeah! And this was no ordinary victory. This was a fork in the road of human civilization. Okay. This there are elections that come and go. Some elections are, important, some are not. But this one this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. Can you imagine?
Hold on, I just want to pause it there for 1 second, because that's the one that's considered that there's been a lot of controversy about that specific moment where he appears to be doing a fascist salute. Some self-proclaimed fascism experts on Twitter say that this is 100% a Hitler, a salute, hailing Hitler. I remain pretty skeptical given just the kind of chaotic, jerky movements of Elon Musk, and also the fact that he says from the heart. So I would like to ask that we not do this thing where we're immediately jumping to fascism every time something weird unfolds. Hey, do either of you have anything you want to say about that, or I can keep playing the clip?
He's a goofball, right? He
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have great body control. I don't think he was Sig Heiling.
All right, let's keep going.
It's just, this
Sorry.
whole thing just strikes me as like complete, like it makes me so angry that we're about to do apparently a whole nother cycle of this total bullshit. It was the same as the OK symbol being like a white nationalist sign. Do you remember that whole scandal? And it's like the other thing that I mentioned on Twitter, which I think is a little bit of a stupid take, or maybe it's a brilliant one, is like, isn't Trump so incredibly obsessed with himself that he wouldn't just simply co-opt an old sign, an old symbol associated with Hitler, but rather like he's so oriented toward branding. He makes everything his own. He takes sneakers and puts his name and his colors on them. He does this with, apparently cryptocurrency. Now, like everything has to be Trump branded. So why on earth would he simply like co-opt something so profoundly associated with Adolf Hitler, right? Like that's just at least like if we're actually going to play out the like how does America descend into fascistville or whatever, like at least kind of like keep it consistent with all the other things we know to be true about Trump's preferences and character. It just
Right.
doesn't make sense to me. I think it's all
But
kind of like
but you know what's
bullshit.
going to happen? It happened with the OK sign. There's the trolling aspect and the owning the libs aspect. So in a
Yeah.
couple,
Now they're going to
I
do
don't
it all
know
the
if
time. Yeah.
Musk will deny it, but then he'll do something consciously like it, or someone else will
Yeah.
like wave to his grandpa in the crowd with too stiff an arm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's continue through this because I do want to talk about the content.
We to have American astronauts plant the flag on another planet for the first time. And one of the fundamental things, one of the most American values that I love is optimism. And this feeling like we're gonna make the future good. We're gonna make it good.
All right, so look, I've been waiting for a long time for an actual hopeful and optimistic vision to be put forward. And as goofy and chaotic as that all was, I am grateful that he's at least trying to get Americans to aim for something higher again. Like, I would love for SpaceX to get to Mars. I think the NASA half of that equation, that partnership, is going to make it more complicated than maybe it seems on its face. But it would be great, I think, for people to be excited about progress again, escape the doom loop, the negative contagion we talked last week with Tyler Cowen about, and he warned us about. I'm glad that is being injected into this moment. I don't know, that we've talked about the kind of civil war within MAGA. I think there's a lot of tension between the different wings of the party, and not everyone is on board with the kind of policies, including high skilled immigration, that are needed to really push that kind of technological progress forward. But I was glad to see that on stage.
Yeah, on my Substack, I wrote about an article called Other People's Oligarchs, and this was Joe Biden warning specifically about Musk. And yeah, I don't think it's great that someone could donate. First of all, that someone could donate all that money. Second of all, that someone could donate all that money and get an important job in government. But that said, you know, Gates, Bloomberg, Buffett, they each donated $50 to $100 million. The cumulative total of those donations in the Future Forward PAC were $900 million, and Musk donated $277 million. And for him, it's pretty much a rounding error, and he has saved money on SpaceX, and SpaceX is a great good for America and saves the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. And Tesla's probably done more to decarbonize the world than any other company. So if anyone could do it, it's Elon Musk. And he's a weird guy, but he's a passionate guy. And I'm just interested to see how it plays out. It will probably play out that his own businesses will get less regulated than would have happened if he weren't in this role. And that is a trade-off, and that is not good. But this is probably the most interesting part of what this administration could do. And I don't look at it purely with doom. I'm with you, Zach.
Yeah, although it is interesting on, policies, whether they will benefit Elon Musk's businesses or not. This whole, we're revoking the EV mandate. We're taking away the electric car credits. I'm curious, like, how. I wish there had been a cutaway to his face when Trump delivered that line, because I'm curious, like, what he thinks about that.
But there
I
is no
personally think
EV car mandate. Like that's a great thing to get rid of, right?
Yeah, but there have been the tax credits, though, which were repealed during the Trump administration, and I think re-implemented during Biden and taken away.
But Elon didn't qualify, right? Because he didn't have because Tesla wasn't built with sufficient union labor. So that's probably good for him business wise. It's most of
True.
the bellicosity towards China, which he doesn't have because he wants to be in business there. That is that cuts against Elon's interest. But I think Elon knows enough to keep in mind the important stuff.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I know you have to run. Got started a little late. Liz and I are going to stick around for a little bit longer to talk about some of the executive orders, but I
We
want to,
promise not to talk shit about you, Mike.
You can. No problem.
before you go, we want to ask you the final question of the show, which we ask everybody, which is, what is a question that you think more people should be asking?
I do division. And so when I hear about the cost of something, I like to divide and say, oh, that's so much per person. So the question you should ask is, whenever you get a big bill, a big government bill, is how much is that per person? How much is that per taxpayer? How much is that on the individual level? And does this work out? Or what does this mean for per unit, right? I'll give you two quick examples. I just was interviewing the mayor of Birmingham, and it's a city of, 200,000 people. Here's his book, and he talked about a program that he instituted, and everyone who graduates a Birmingham school can go to a 4-year college or 2-year college in state, and they'll meet all of they'll pay for it. And so how many people benefited? 1,600. How much did it cost? Said 11 million. I'm like, well, okay, that's like what, $700 a person? That seems totally doable, right? If you do the division, it's like, yeah, every city could do that. On the other hand, I was looking at how, New York City housing prices and how much it costs to build a unit for homeless people, or the cost per homeless person to get institutionalized, if you will. And if you do the division there, it winds up being, $500,000 per sustained unit. And you could just begin to see why that is an intractable problem. Intractable, I almost said. So talk shit about me for saying intractable.
It's a great question, and it's going to set up what I'm going to talk about next, which is tariffs, because that needs to be really accounted for on the household level. How much is that going to affect each household? But we'll let you go before we get into that, Mike. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming on
Mike.
the show. We hope to bring you back sometime to defend seed oils. Because there's been some seed oil haters on the show, and I know you've got a different take on that.
Who could they be?
Okay.
Take care, Mike.
Bye. See ya.
Okay, Liz, I teased that clip, which was my other selection, about Trump talking about tariffs. You mind if we play that? Because I had a few thoughts on that. Okay.
Roll it.
Roll that, John.
I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before. To restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government, my administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay, so the reason that jumps out to me is because it's a continuation of the what the rhetoric we heard on the trail, which is completely false, which is that this is simply a tax on foreigners and a benefit to Americans. I mean, any tax analysis that you look at, we'll link one from the Tax Foundation, but it finds that these taxes result in that being, at least some of it being passed on to consumers. Some of them estimated up to $2,000 per household. Some of that depends on how the Fed reacts. The Fed has its own, handcuffs on right now in terms of worrying about inflation. We've seen how fragile the supply chains have been. So this really is probably my top concern when I think about the next 100 days, because this is the kind of thing that could really throw things off track from the get-go. If we start experiencing inflation again because tariffs are kind of lathered on the economy by the external revenue service, then we're not going to have that kind of optimistic pro-growth future of progress that Elon Musk is painting. So I'm hoping that some sense will come through here. I think Tyler's prediction is that it's going to be a lobbying bonanza. Certain industries are just going to be able to carve out exemptions, and eventually be this weird patchwork. And yeah,
I have a theory that's going to make you mad.
okay.
So you can yell at me if you need to, and I'm talking about the household level, not the manufacturing level. Do
Mm-hmm.
you think that it is perhaps possible that some dumb housewives, say yours truly over here, might in fact feel a sense of like sort of relief that cheap sort of made in China goods will now be made more expensive, and so now it sort of provides this clear incentive. Like, if self-control doesn't work, if discipline doesn't work, do we in fact need an externally imposed incentive to stop it with all that nonsense? I recognize that this is a little bit stupid, but there's a little bit of this strain of like return with a V, and like the Maha,
Yeah.
make America healthy again, sort of anti, certain food dyes, all this. Like, there's a little bit of a strain of people who are saying, look, we have infinite optionality and so much abundance. And is it in fact making us healthy and prosperous and fulfilled? No, it's not. Instead, we're using the million streaming services we have access to, or the millions of cheap goods we have access to via Amazon, as a sort of balm for the weary soul that isn't in fact working. Like, is it possible that some people will in fact be like happy about this and that it will be good for them? I say this at a household level, not a manufacturing level, because it's obvious that tariffs will make manufacturing of absolutely necessary goods, like, I don't know, medicines, food staples, building materials to build houses, like making those things more expensive will be awful. But I
Yeah.
am curious about, like, will, televisions being made more expensive actually result in the sort of like mass ire that we're anticipating?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about the specific category of televisions, but
Yeah, televisions is a stupid example, but like whatever crap you buy on Amazon, right? Like, if that
yeah,
became 20% more expensive or whatever tomorrow, like, would people actually sort of like
I,
revolt?
I just think it's hard to separate the manufacturing from the household in the way that you're trying to do, because that's
Yeah.
how we
My
get the goods
argument
into our households. And like all the stuff that
my
you're
theory
that
only works for that.
making us that you're saying make us unhealthy and stuff, like plenty of that stuff is American homegrown. Plenty of that, especially when we're talking about foodstuffs, a lot of this is tied up in the way that the US subsidizes certain parts of the agriculture sector, right? So
Well, I'm not
it,
talking
yeah.
literally. I'm not talking literally about like what I'm saying is the type of person who cheers the banning of certain dyes, who's
Hmm.
excited about RFK, who feels this like the sort of archetypal extremely online trad wife or trad husband or whatever. Like is it possible that there won't be such a political backlash to this type of thing, but that in fact people will be like, optionality and abundance did us wrong. Like, this is way better than before. Like, will we see that sort of political undercurrent come out? Or is
Honestly,
this like a
I
sign that
would
I've been
be
on Twitter too long?
I would be very surprised, just because, like, first of all, that subculture is I think pretty small, and
Mhm.
secondly, I think people are really just going to be looking at their bottom line. Like,
People just want cheap shit.
is it easier for me to get the stuff that makes my life more comfortable, or is it harder? Like, that's kind of the resolution that most people are looking at these questions. And I think a big reason why Biden lost so definitively, because people just didn't feel that way after the inflation set in. They felt that, even if they couldn't articulate exactly why it was happening, there was just this sense of things are harder. It's harder to like live the lifestyle that I was 5 years ago. And if that happens because of, poor economic decisions at the top, then Trump's not going to pay the price because he's not running for a third term, but whoever's his successor is
Well, the
probably
thing that's
will.
interesting about that sentiment is that it felt like everything got bad everywhere all at once. And I think that that was really hard for people, right? There was a sense of like, um sort of the what did they call it, the Atlantic or somebody termed it like the millennial lifestyle subsidy expiring. And what they meant by that was that for a while there in the early 2010s and slightly before, there was such an infusion of VC cash in things like Ubers, in things like Airbnbs, and things like all the different little delivery services for food and groceries and all these things. And that at a certain point, many of these companies really struggled with profitability. And so it felt like for many people, there was this bait and switch. I think we've also seen this in streaming services, right? For a while, it looked like we have the unbundling of cable TV. And in fact, we have these disruptors. But what happens if all of these disruptors, first of all, you don't get one of them anymore. Now you get like 6 of them. And then second of all, slowly but surely over the years, they've reintroduced ads even for the paid for services. And so there's a sense of like, well, is this actually better than the thing that we had before, the thing that it disrupted? I think many people just felt this sense of like, those are fairly trivial, petty things to be worried about. But if your housing's also more expensive than you anticipated, and then your food is also more expensive than you anticipated, and then it's not like education or medical bills are categories where, they're full of disruptors and where costs are going down. I think it led to people feeling this bigger picture sense of like, well, what exactly am I getting that's a good deal here? And I guess the thing that I'm curious about with Trump is like he manages to, I think, very beautifully tap into this discontent, the sort of simmering discontent. And I think he's pretty incisive with trying to figure out like what is it that people are actually reacting to. So I guess the thing that I'm curious about is like if tariffs are being slapped on a bunch of imported goods at the same time that inflation is continuing to be tamped down, and that food prices hopefully
That's a
in
big
some
if.
categories will be minimally affected by tariffs. Like, if these things happen in conjunction, what will the political reception be?
Yeah. If he pulls that off, then it will be far different than what I'm imagining.
Mhm.
I'm suggesting that the reliance of our economy on international trade is perhaps underappreciated
Oh,
by
yeah.
the
I agree with that.
American, and that the sort of knock-on effects of a really aggressive tariffing policy are going to affect people in maybe ways they aren't expecting. The one thing that I could see,
Autarky, like, I think it's important to say autarky is bad. China is pursuing essentially everything homegrown model, and I think that, A, they've been pursuing that for many years at this point,
no,
and so there's definitely a transition period where you go from being reliant on imports to reliant on things that are, made at home, and China has been on that transition for many, many years now. The United States, I think, will experience this, like, horrifying shock to the system, right? And
yeah.
also, autarky, in my opinion, is not, like, desirable in any way.
Yeah,
Continue.
and the one thing that I could see balancing it out is Trump, which we're probably not going to have time to get into much today, but we can do a future episode on this. Is Trump's energy policy? He's going to open up exploration. He's going to make it easier to drill gas and possibly do things like nuclear plants. And energy is that's the baseline from which the rest of the economy grows. So if he's doing that at the same time as implementing economically destructive tariffs, then maybe it could be a wash. I mean, we also have to distinguish between tariffs that are just protecting an industry, which I think are not very defensible, and tariffs that are, or even prohibitions on, like security-based prohibitions on technology being imported that could, be a cyber threat or a surveillance threat. And that's a different conversation. But on pure protectionism, I mean, I think that the economic literature is pretty strong. That's going to be rough, and it's going to disproportionately fall on the working class voters that gave Trump the victory.
But the thing
Um,
that I'm curious
yeah.
about is, like, will this galvanize opposition for Trump? Like, will the people who have been Trump's biggest sycophants and cheerleaders, people from,
Mm,
working class Detroit, like, will they see the connection here? Will they how will they actually react to this? I think it's
mm,
fairly easy to say, well, free market economists say, and it's like, okay, sure, maybe like their lives will be made more expensive, but like, how will these people in the aggregate react to this? Trump has been pretty consistent from the get go that this is going to happen. So they won't be shocked it's possible that they, haven't actually anticipated what it will feel like to be hit so hard in the pocketbook. But I'm just curious about what sort of political backlash will happen, especially because I would imagine, knowing what we know of Trump, if he catches a sense that there is this, massive backlash coming from the very people who initially supported him, it's
Yeah.
not clear to me that then he'll proceed with this, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
think that's
we know
yeah.
Trump loves to be loved, and so, like, it's the political dynamic here that I'm really fascinated by, but, like, well, I don't think that this will go off without a hitch, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and there's a big stew of different things between the tariffs and the energy policy and the role of Doge cutting down the state, and will he actually slash income tax? So, it's going to be a big mixture of
Yeah.
things that
What
we'll
if
have to.
tariffs are slapped on and income taxes are
Yeah.
somehow
Well,
miraculously cut down? Like, what would
yeah.
happen in that
Well, that was
case?
sort of how he sold it, because he's talking about the old days where when the government was completely funded by tariffs and there was no income tax. And if that's what we were talking about, I'd be open to hearing it. What I fear is going to happen. This is like the same thing of when people talk about UBI and they're like, libertarians, UBI is good at replacing the welfare
Replaces the
state, but
welfare
it's
state.
always like,
Nope,
no,
not
it's going to
always.
be on top of the welfare state. We're going
Yeah.
to have an external revenue service and an internal revenue service. If we were making a trade, be a different
Yeah.
conversation. But I
Yeah.
want to ask you, Liz, to wrap up the conversation about one more clip that you had brought to the table, which was about DEI. Can we roll that, John?
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
Like that.
This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay. And I will sign an order to stop our warriors from being subjected to radical political theories and social experiments while on duty. It's going to end immediately.
So I'm obviously very upset about this as the DEI hire of this podcast. It's very tough that my employment will now be jeopardized. No, but I do think that, Trump is, I'm obviously joking around, but I do think that what Trump is getting at is like return to common sense here. For many people not totally steeped in all of the women's and gender studies departments, in academia, like a lot of the DEI and gender obsession that has really gripped lots of parts of the American boardroom and the American government at the federal and state level has just been it's been so upsetting to watch. It feels like one giant distraction from people actually doing their jobs. And I think Trump's focus here is really interesting. Rhetorically, he pivots from talking about DEI and trans stuff to talking about the military and service members who were suspended for refusing to get the vaccine when it was mandated. I mean, I think what he's sort of attempting to subtly plant here is that for lots of people who are tasked with very critical parts of defending the homeland and, ensuring that America stays America, like members of the military, it has been a royal distraction trying to force a lot of this DEI and gender politics nonsense down their throats. And also the COVID vaccine, which many people, rightfully, understandably objected to. And I think Trump is basically saying all of these things that have been these giant distractions, like no more. we're just not going to do that now. And on one hand, I mean, Trump can't really do anything without it becoming a massive culture war issue to his haters and objectors. This will be yet another heinous thing that he does. But I'm really hopeful that more and more policies like this being scrapped can put an end to a lot of this very distracting culture war nonsense. I mean, on a very fundamental level, we were in a good place during the Obama years when it comes to racial justice and the advancement of women and all of these other things, which I think liberals in the true sense of the word want. We want people to be equal, and for people to be put in positions of prominence because of merit, not because of skin deep criteria. And so I think Trump is really trying to signal, when you're in a really important position, like in the military or running a Fortune 500 company, it is important that you not have your time sucked away by all of this fucking bullshit. And I think it's really good that Trump is doing that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, he referenced the fact that the inauguration was on MLK Day, and gave a nod to the idea that we are pursuing the ideals that MLK put out there. And it's been
Oh,
in
we
the
are.
past decade or so, it's kind of been unfashionable to say that, to
Which,
promote
how
the ideals.
crazy is that? How
It is
crazy is it
crazy.
that that's become like that's fallen out of fashion to be like,
Yeah,
people ought to be judged according to their character and advanced
exactly.
because of their merit. Like, the fact
It's
that
more
that's been unacceptable is insanity.
Yeah, it's more fashionable to sort of take an MLK quote out of context to justify rioting and looting.
Yeah.
That's the MLK quote that it's fashionable to gravitate to. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Liz, that a sort of attitudinal shift to merit is kind of the bottom line here, and that's something that ties together with what Elon Musk is putting out there. It's like, if we want to like take our culture to the next level and like be serious about progress, then we need to focus on like getting things done and not obsessing over like minute differences. It was a good um strain. What I'm curious to ask you about is like, how much of that do you think will trickle down to other institutions? Because Trump has authority of the federal government. So much of this stuff has happened in the universities and then kind of emanated out to the corporate world. Do you think it will have effects beyond Washington, D.C.?
Well, Trump is very smart to do this, right? Because this is a trend that has already been set in motion. The sort of slow reversal of some of these completely nonsensical policies. I would say that we've really been rolling a lot of this stuff back for the last year or two. And now Trump is very much planting his flag, which we've known where he stands on this issue all along. But I think he's positioning himself to be able to take some amount of credit. Whether it's appropriate for him to take that credit is, I think, very debatable, but I think it's a smart sort of trick of his. That said, federal policy does matter, and I think that this will hopefully just kind of make it an issue that's dead on arrival. I contrasted a little bit with Nancy Mace's bathroom kerfuffle, where I guess there's a new member of Congress who's trans, and so
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Mace made a whole big hubbub about them using the women's bathroom in the sort of congressional complex. And that strikes me as the exact type of thing that we really shouldn't be wasting a bunch of time on, because it's like, we should be in the business of actually governing. And I at least like Trump's approach to this, which seemed very much just like, we're reversing these things. Now let's move on to other issues. We're reversing the vaccine mandate, which was totally unjust and unreasonable. We're reversing the DEI stuff. We're reversing some of the gender identity nonsense, like boom, boom, boom. And I like the fact that he wasn't overly fixated on that. At least to me, that bodes well. That said, when Trump gets something, stuck in his mind, he gets pretty obsessive about that. So I just hope that he legitimately means what he says in this department.
Last question, Liz. What, people tend to think of presidential terms that they look at the first 100 days and think, what is going to be accomplished in these first 100 days? Is there a particular issue that you're going to be particularly focused on or looking at to evaluate how things are going in Trump 2.0?
Well, you're going to get mad at me again. Oh no. I don't want to say. No, I'm excited to see how Trump handles what's
Our
happening between
viewers think
Israel
that I'm
and
like always yelling at you, I think. This is not the case. People just
in your quiet way. I feel like you're always yelling at me in your quiet way. No, I think I think that I'm really excited to see what Trump does in terms of brokering some amount of peace between Israel and Hamas. We're currently in the very, very early stages of yet another ceasefire, yet another exchange of hostages taken on October 7th for Palestinian prisoners. It appears to be going pretty well thus far, but I do think Trump is in a position of, great influence to be able to really try to get Netanyahu to see a way out of this conflict. And I'm curious to see whether this mixture of Trump's very aggressive, blunt talk, but also him being, I think, kind of a pragmatist with foreign policy issues, I'm curious to see whether this will yield a little bit more progress in between Israel and Hamas. I mean, this has been a extremely awful, bloody conflict. There were 1,200 people murdered by Hamas terrorists in Israel on October 7th. There's still, I guess, a little under 100 hostages currently in Gaza. There's allegedly going to be some 30 released back. We're not sure whether they're all dead or alive. Some number of them are alive. But there's many, many more hostages to be released. And then when it comes to actual death toll of Gazans, I mean, we have a massive death toll of women and children there. Many, many tens of thousands. The exact number is not totally known because unfortunately Gaza's health ministry is run by Hamas. But I am, an advocate for peace and also an advocate for pragmatic foreign policy. And I think that Trump has a real opportunity here. I'm hopeful that the timing is right and that this conflict is ended once and for all. Maybe not once and for all, but at least this current iteration of it. I mean, it feels like we're really close, What are
Yeah.
you hopeful for?
Well, I'll be watching the goings on of Doge because I think this just represents the first time since I don't know, since I've been paying attention to politics that there's been a real momentum to at least talk about cutting government. I mean, we had the Tea Party, which had the positive effect of getting people like Rand Paul or Thomas Massie or Justin Amash into office. But now this feels like the next, over a decade later, the next step in that process of actually trying to cope with the massive debt that is on our back. And if we don't do something about it feels like a kind of do or die moment. Doge has, it was, there was an executive order that officially authorized Doge to exist, but it has no real legislative authority, obviously. On the other hand, people like Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, very smart, accomplished guys are involved with that. And so in the spirit of Elon's speech, I will, have some optimism and hope that we make some progress there before we really start to feel some deleterious effects of this like insane debt to GDP ratio. So I'll just be watching to see what, if anything, Doge accomplishes in the first 100 days.
Absolutely. What's one question you think more people should be asking? Just kidding.
Yeah. What is within your control to, what can you actually control, and what those things that are beyond that scope, maybe spend a little less time thinking about that and focus on doing what you can in your own life and community.
Beautiful. Shall we wrap?
Yep. Liz, thanks for the talk. Everyone, we'll be back next week. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Just Asking Questions. We drop a new episode every Thursday, so if you want to support the work we do, please like and share this episode, subscribe to our new YouTube channel, and follow the show on your favorite podcasting app. See you next time.